Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for those who joined in person and online. My name is Ruby Powers, and we're talking about Know Your Rights, protection, preparedness, and your options for relief. Trying to put a lot of information in a short period of time, but really, I think the key points I want to get across to the community is just you should have an experienced immigration attorney on hand that you've already talked to in advance. And then you should, it's sort of like, when's the best time to get a will? Is it before or after you die? Before, because you don't want to have sort of like a crisis mode. And we are we are in crisis mode for a lot of immigrants right now. And the second thing is just to be prepared, because it's probably something's going to happen, even if you have a status, because the Supreme Court more or less said racial profiling is allowed. And we're hearing reports of even US citizens getting deported, or legal permanent residents being questioned about their status, and et cetera. So everything I'm talking about today might be depressing and negative for some, but this is literally what I'm living in every day as an immigration attorney. So, and as our clients as well. So I wear a few hats. I've had my law firm for 16 years this month, actually, I think on Monday. I'm board certified with the State Bar of Texas, and I speak Spanish and a little bit of French and Turkish, but from my travels abroad. And the firm is a full service, which means that we can do employment-based investment, asylum, victims of crime, victims of domestic violence, immigration court, and family-based waivers, you name it within immigration. Even federal litigation, we have been adding habeas for people who've been unlawfully detained, and also mandamuses for cases that have been taking too long. I also have two books about law practice management, an adjunct professor at South Texas College of Law, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma chapter secretary, amongst some other things. All right, so I did want to, in my updated PowerPoint, I had a quote that I just was in the New York Times yesterday, but it's about what's happening with separation of families and the disappearing of people. But if you just look up New York Times on my Facebook, or my LinkedIn, you'll find it. But I'm really grateful to be a part of that conversation and try to highlight what's really happening. So there's just been a huge shift since January 2025 on what's happening. There's just been an increase of ICE arrests, and nationwide, there's a number that ICE is trying to meet every day. I think it's like 3,000. Maybe it was 1,000 and it's 3,000. Anyway, they're trying it every which way. One thing that was said a lot was that they were trying to get criminals, but for the most part, the people that are getting picked up and detained don't have a criminal record at all, and they are they're family members, they have children, they've been living here, and they just seem to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. So 45% of people detained had no prior criminal history, but I do believe this was part of a PR campaign to say that people were criminals. Maybe the only crime might have been overstaying a visa potentially, or entering illegally potentially, but for the most part, actually committing a crime in which they were arrested or detained or have a criminal charge. They don't have that. We've seen many family members. We're hearing stories of parents dropping their kids off and not coming home because they got detained. We're hearing stories of people, they just got out of court, and I heard this story that one of the family members said, I need to go to the restroom. They went to the restroom and then they disappeared. They later were found in a detention facility. So we've heard of Americans being detained. We've heard of legal permanent residents being detained. We've heard of them actually getting deported. And there was up to 4 million immigration court cases more just recently, or hovering around over 3.5 to 4 million, which is a lot. which is the highest that we've seen ever. And there's a lot of moving parts. There's just like, honestly, if you don't pay attention to immigration 24/7, you could be behind. If I try to take the weekend off, I get behind because mostly things also get dropped on Friday nights when they think that the media and the people who do this work are not paying attention. But this is what we've been trained to do: is we can't sleep and we have to keep working 24/7. So okay, we heard about the Chicago, what was going on over there. We heard about DC. It seems like they're in LA. So there's been cities where they've been deployed to support ICE operations. We hear reports even here in Houston at different parts. We'll get like these heads up that they're coming or something like that. Even the last couple of weeks, we heard of them in like Pasadena and around the city. Collateral arrests are when ICE is looking for a particular person, and they go to a home, and then someone opens the door because they didn't, let's say they didn't ask for the warrant. Maybe they see an administrative warrant and they open the door, but they really should have waited for a judicial warrant. But all of the things that we were talking about back in January and February in these Know Your Rights, almost it doesn't really seem to matter because they're just might be walking along on the street. And ICE might be looking for somebody else, but then if they see that person start asking questions, maybe not even asking questions, and if that person is getting detained. So that's what collateral, it's like they're looking in the area and people they pick up along the way, that's a collateral arrest. There's been a lot of deceptive tactics. We've seen that where people, ICE or those who are working alongside ICE are getting covered up, not showing their badge, not showing who they are. And in fact, we've also heard reports that's been going on since January where people are pretending to be ICE to kidnap and extort and et cetera people. So it has gotten very lawless and unfortunate, the deceptive tactics. There's been, earlier in the year, we also had the expedited removal expansion. So what it meant was before, if a person was in the United States, it couldn't be expeditedly removed unless they had been here under 2 years or they were found within 100 miles of the border. But they changed that real quickly in the beginning of the year and said that if you were you were found within a couple, I'm sorry, it used to be 2 weeks and 100 miles, but now it's 2 years. But the thing is that the definition of what 2 years is has been very nebulous as well to meet the needs of the expedited removal. What does expedited removal really accomplish? Well, it means that you get a deportation order without seeing a judge. And it can be done very swiftly. And it can be very harmful because it doesn't give people opportunity to fight in court unless they can make a plea that they're afraid for their lives. Even that is barely working anymore either. So expedited removal can be very dangerous for individuals because then it's a deportation order and they're not allowed to come back for 5 years. And that's just for that particular situation. So there's just a lot of this going on. And it'll probably continue to go on until people fight and with lawsuits and the community says we're not gonna do this anymore. But even just recently, I saw that the mayor admitted that the HPD has been working with ICE, even though they had been saying they weren't. But I had a feeling that they were from the reports of my clients that were telling me what happened. So it is very, very difficult for local municipalities and cities because of where funding comes from. So I understand it's very complicated. So how they conduct raids are often surprise visits, unannounced. I mean, this is basically it. Surprise visits. There could be impersonation, misrepresentation. There's a lot of information sharing. Like, let me give you an example. In the summer, around June or so, we heard reports at the local immigration courts, and this was happening all around the country too, where they were in immigration court, people would go to court, and then OPA would dismiss the court case, and they were communicating with ICE and saying this person is no longer in proceedings, they don't have anything pending, and then they were getting picked up in the hallway or in the parking lot or somewhere else. Now, what happens when this happens? Well, then people are afraid to go to court. And then this also feeds into the narrative that people don't go to court and they don't show up for their hearings. They were going to their hearings, but then after this has made, if you look at the statistics, people are not as going to their hearings as much because they're afraid of this particular situation. It just takes a handful of these stories happening around the country to scare people, and so that fed into the narrative that people are not attending their hearings, and now the reports are showing that it escalated the number of people not going to court, which is a problem because then they have in absentia deportation hearings orders, and then if they're found along the world and then they could be swiftly deported. A story, I had a mom. She was using a paper plate for her car. She was waiting for the one to come in. That seems to be a telltale sign for police to pull you over. So don't do that. And because I've had two clients detained because of that this year alone. And she found out with that interaction with the police. So police pulls her name and information. They find that she has a deportation order, and then they were waiting for ICE to come and pick her up. She did not know about the deportation order. She had 3 children at home, an 8, a 2, and a 3-year-old. A couple of them were Americans, and she didn't get to see them again. Now they're still here in the United States, and she's was swiftly deported. We tried to keep her here multiple ways, and none of it worked. They are not approving stays of deportation, which used to work if you had a humanitarian situation like that. Her husband or her partner was in jail for domestic violence against her. So those children actually are with a relative, neither one of them, their parents. And this is a story that is very common, but it's not getting out there because people are afraid to speak up. And there's so many mixed status homes right now that people, if one person gets deported and someone has an unstable status, the people are afraid to speak up. So that's why I want to get the word out about that New York Times article that came out yesterday that I was quoted in, because I want people to know that the family separation that happened in 2018, there was a locale, a time, there was a concentration of it happening. There was an outcry. I was at Port Isabel detention facility and helped get the word out to a lot of reporters. But someone asked me, why are we not having this outcry right now? It's because it's dispersed, it's secret, it's silent. People don't know what's happening. But I'm starting to hear people say, oh, my son's classmate's parent got deported, or I know someone, and so now the stories are starting to pick up, and it might be more because we're in the Houston area, but I think it's going to be spreading, especially where the immigrants are. There's people who interact with immigrants more readily, and it's not just like some far away off thing. It's happening to people we know. And then there's a lot more interaction in the digital and location tracking. I think something to do with Palantir, some other things that are going on between monitoring social media, public records, utility bills. I'm hearing reports that they knew ICE was following them. They knew where they were, what they were doing. There's a lot more data sharing than ever before. So it's getting to a whole nother level. There was also earlier in the year a requirement to register. There was like a long list. If this and this, then you should register. And register, I mean like let the government know that you're here. And now they're saying if you don't register, you could be a fine up to $5,000. There's also other fines. One of my clients got a $1.8 million fine because he didn't leave after a deportation order that he hadn't known about. We were able to fight that currently, but we're still unsure what the future will hold for that. But never in any other president have we ever heard, other than Trump, that they were imposing these types of fines. So like if you step back, what I'm talking about is there's just a series of like a death by 1,000 cuts of policies that, barely any of this was conducted by Congress. The only thing was like Lake and Riley Act pretty much in the beginning of January. But everything else has just been interpretations, case law, administrative changes in terms of who's in charge and what's the policy interpretation and what are they going to do. Even the firing or letting go or whatever the word is of 100 of the 700 immigration judges, and then now replacing many with military attorneys who are swiftly trained to try to understand immigration and take the spot of the ones who were trained and vetted and had been serving on the bench. But I think the common trend of the 100 or so that were let go were that they had high approval rates. And so these is also consideration of what's going on. So the Lake and Ranley Act is, I believe, pretty much the only bill that was actually passed on immigration this whole year. Everything else has just been interpretations, case law and changes. And I haven't seen it truly made a big impact. It just sounds more scary, but I think it's also about interpretations, but it's allowing certain individuals with crimes to be mandatory detained. Now, the thing is that historically immigrants have less crimes in general. It's just been a part of this administration's narrative to say that the immigrants are criminals, but it's also open to interpretation. I think he's leaning into the fact that they might have overstayed or didn't have a status at some point as being a crime, but that's not technically a crime. It's a civil matter. So anyway, knowing your rights, things to know are if ICE were to be at the door to ask to see a judicial warrant signed by a judge, you can go online and look at the difference between judicial and administrative warrant. It's deceptive, but you can see it's good to just study it. Just Google it, look at it online, compare the two, and be aware. But not just you. If anyone else in your home has in status insecure or unstable, please have them look at it too. You know, we talked a lot about this early in January and February, but then I've been seeing that this is almost fruitless explaining this because people are getting picked up everywhere else, like on the street, near a grocery store, gas station, wherever. And they're not really going to the homes as much because that's where people have been trained to know about this. But the point of it is to look at the warrant, to know what it says. You have the right to remain silent. But the thing is that if someone in the house or wherever you're at opens the door, it defeats the purpose because then the other thing is these things are happening in the morning, they're happening on the weekends, they're happening when the attorneys are not available and you have to be in the moment. I've heard of reports of ministers going to homes and talking with ICE and trying to get them to not take the person at that moment. There's a lot of different stories about what's been going on. You know, even if we say what your rights are, I feel like we're seeing so many different stories of people whose rights are being violated. But we still need to know what they are. So you have the right to remain silent, don't provide any false documents, don't run. I think you should probably, if you feel you should, any immigrant should have an immigration attorney on standby that knows about their case. That's probably, like I said at the very beginning, one of the most important things. Know what you're eligible for, know that you have a attorney. Because what happens is if you get detained and you don't have an attorney that knows your case, you're detained. You're gonna take a day or two to show up if you are eligible to not be deported rapidly, to be put in the system. And then it's gonna be hard to actually talk with the attorney because you're gonna be using the phone, which somebody's listening to you while you're sitting in the big room, or you might be able to do Zoom, or that you have to pay the attorney to go visit you. All of that takes time and energy. So you really want to have all these conversations done and documents shared beforehand. One of my clients that got detained earlier because of the paper plate on a brand new car, it took his wife about a week to give me everything because she was not privy. And this is a very another common trend. A lot of times it's the males who know where everything is in some of the cultures, and the women don't know anything about the taxes, the bank accounts, the records. This does not help anybody because it took her an extra week to figure all of this out. He was detained that whole time, an extra time. So if people are saying like one person knows where everything is, again, if they were to just die, how would that would be a mess. People would not know where anything is. So people need to write out where their accounts are, what the passwords are, that have scanned key documents. Because the idea would be to communicate, if you don't previously have a good relationship with an immigration attorney, to have one immediately after detention so that you can give them the key birth certificates, marriage certificates, children's birth certificates, taxes and documents. So there has been an increase in workplace raids. The employer is not legally required to let ICE in without a warrant. Stay calm, do not run. I've been hearing reports that sometimes the employers know that a raid is going to come and they try to warn their employees or team members. But I don't think that's always the case, that they have that they're privy to that information. It's important not to sign anything unless you understand what it is and to have legal counsel. And you can hire an attorney, but you don't. It's not like they're paid in immigration unless you're in certain very rare parts of the country that there's funding for that. But for the most part, this is all on your own dime to hire an immigration attorney. So, okay, this is a list of people that I think, let me just go back a second. So we had Trump for 4 years, and then we had Biden. Biden reversed a lot of what Trump's policies, and he opened up a lot of paroles and temporary protected status. We had the temporary protected status for the Afghans, for the Ukrainians, for the Venezuelans, many different groups. But there also was the parole for the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelans. And it was to try to prevent people from entering illegally and to give them an opportunity. So there was a lot of exploration in these temporary statuses. Well, when Trump went into office in the beginning of 2025, pretty much went to work on reversing all of what Biden had done. And so a majority of the temporary protected statuses are phasing out, or they already have phased out. There's been a lot of things going on with the Supreme Court going back and forth. What I've sort of seen from my clients is that they seem to think that they're different and it won't happen to them. But I'm like, look around. All of the TPSs are ending, including ones that have been around for 20 plus years. And so really we're waiting right now to get a decision about the DACA specifically in Texas, because what they're saying is that there's a lawsuit that says that they won't allow DACA recipients in Texas to have work authorization. And if you can't work authorization, not only does that make you not eligible to work, but you can't get a driver's license, which makes life really, really difficult here in Texas because it's so big and everything you need to drive. So DACA recipients, which Texas is probably like the #2 state with most DACA recipients, is waiting to find out this decision. DACA recipients are just on pins and needles waiting to find out what's going to happen. Many of them are going to move out of the state if that is an unfavorable decision, and we're going to lose a lot of people. I just want to say that the oldest DACA recipient, based off of the requirement, is 44. So they're not kids anymore, and some of them even might be grandparents, but they are pillars in the community. Teachers, business owners, the right hand. They speak English very well. I've hired a lot of DACA recipients, and they're some of the best employees that I've ever had. So we are monitoring this, but this is a concern. Temporary protected status has been ending and phasing out for the most part. There's multiple countries, so you go to USCIS, TPS website, and you see what's going on. There's charts. But I'm mentioning all of this is because people need to have a backup plan. And this is another reason why you need to go to an immigration attorney, because you need to have time to breathe, to think, what is our plan? Because you don't want to have unlawful presence for the most part, because that can close down doors for you to move to other options. Other mixed status families are also at risk because there's usually like American born kids, a green card parent, and a parent that might have had a deportation order or didn't have a status of any sort. Or maybe both of the parents have no status, the kids are all American. I'm hearing reports, what's happening is that families are just sort of like, it's like the pandemic. They're just staying at home. They're not driving. They're not exposing themselves. They're only letting the Americans go to the grocery store. They're scared because they don't know what will happen. Because one thing I forgot to mention, and I think this might be the best place to say it, right now, there is a court case that came out, I think in September. It's like, I always call it hurtado, but I think it's jurado. Anyway, it's something like that. And it basically says that people who entered illegally are not eligible for bond. So that means if a person who's been here for 20 years, has American kids, American spouse, whatever, but for some reason wasn't eligible, and that's possible for a status, gets detained, and they don't already have a deportation order, then they could go to detention facility. We have detention facilities on Greens Road near Bush Airport. We have the Montgomery Processing Center in Conroe. And then there's others. Texas has a lot of detention facilities. Anyway, in fact, people are getting shipped here from around the country. And we also have a big one in Fort Bliss. I'm getting my numbers mixed up, but I think it has 1,000 capacity and they're trying to get up to 3,000 capacity. But anyway, according to this case that came out in September, it basically says that an individual like that cannot get out on bond. Well, what happens if a person gets detained? Well, not only is it very difficult to communicate with their family, but also it's difficult to communicate with their attorney, and they may be waiting for a hearing. Now, if they find out that they're not eligible, they're not going to have a very good chance of approval. Then they're debating, do I pay an attorney to fight, even though I have like I don't know, a 2% chance of approval? Or do I just take the voluntary departure, take a deportation order, go somewhere, and then hope, fingers crossed, I can come back one day, even though it might take years and years. So because of that case that happened in September, many people are just getting deported and giving up. Because one other thing I didn't mention is that a lot of the case law has gotten worse for asylum. So it's gotten rid of victims of domestic violence having an opportunity, family members, gang members. Basically, asylum law is down to a skeleton. It's very difficult now. And it's all been done through like case laws interpretation. The other thing they're doing right now is they're also pre-terminating cases and saying that if you didn't fill out every little box that a judge can pre-terminate you and let you just be, get you out of court and not have asylum pending. So anyway, those are some of the things that we're seeing. And the other thing is that if you can't be approved for asylum and only withholding, then they also are deporting people to like South Sudan and random other countries. On October 31st, they had a case that came out that said that there was agreements between certain countries that they would be able to deport them to. So for the most part, people are getting deported to random countries, and just being not detained is not like a release from pain, because then they're now in some other random country away from their family in danger and separated. And then the question is, do people relocate their whole family to be together, or do they stay separated? And that's what we're starting to see a lot of. So people who had past interactions with police, like minor traffic violations, and those who are in immigration court are also at risk, unfortunately. We're hearing about children being left without parents, like the story I shared. A lot of loss of income between parents being not able to go work, being afraid to go work, or being deported. A lot of anxiety. I mean, the other thing I'm really concerned about is the children, because basically this anxiety is like, it just trickles down to little children, and they're listening to all this stuff. Parents try to keep things back from the kids, but they're hearing it, they sense it, like they can tell. So there's a lot of mental health issues. So if we start hearing more and more reports of children acting up or depressed or this or that in schools, it's probably heavily related to this situation that's causing, in the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. This is one of those critical areas where huge disruptions in the child's life under age 18 can have repercussions for the rest of their lives in terms of their health and life success. And I mean, I think the thing is that we're going to continue to see the impact of this. And even today, I saw a report about the economy with the hiring and the possibilities, and there's just there's a lot of people disappearing. I think one of the last reports I heard, like 1 million people disappeared from the payrolls. And I think a lot of that was due to the strict immigration policies. And like individuals that were losing their work authorization, TPS, and not being able to work. So if you receive some type of notice, there's from ICE, there's a notice to appear, which is a summons to go to immigration court. That is very important to know about what that tells you, when it tells you. They might have a date on the bottom, but it might change. And so there's a website called ACIS, ACIS, for under the Department of Justice, EOIR, and you can put the A number, which is the immigrant number there, and that lets you know what day you really do have court. Order of supervision is when ICE lets you come and do check-ins, but we're hearing a lot of people getting detained and being told that that's going to be their last check-in and that they need to get ready to be deported. And if you do have a final order of deportation, that's probably you're in the worst situation because they're using those to just actually effectuate the being left out, kicked out of the country, basically. But it's important to just have an immigration attorney review all of this, know what it says. If someone is detained, I started walking through that earlier. Usually the biggest question is, does that person have a deportation order already or not? And maybe they had one from a long, long time ago under a different immigration number, but they didn't know it, or maybe they think, but they're not sure. So if they had a prior deportation order, you're pretty much going to know this person's not going to be able to be here very long. It's probably going to, especially if they're from Mexico, it doesn't take long to basically effectuate that deportation order. If they've never been detained before, never been put in immigration court, or don't have a deportation order, then it takes about a day or two for them to show up in the online detainee locator. And then you want to quickly be communicating with them to see what their options might be. Like I was mentioning, the notice to appear is a summons to go to immigration courts or starts that journey. The bond hearing, if many people are not eligible. I will say one positive thing. The Bautista v. Nome is a case that I think is having oral arguments, I think on Monday or something. So I was checking right before. And it's about the mandatory detention for those who entered illegally and that argument. And this is key because so many people are giving up if they get detained. But if they are eligible for a bond, I think people will fight and they will do the bond and try to get out. So we're all watching this because this is a key part of the ecosystem and give people some hope to continue to fight. Let's see. There's also, I mean, I guess there's also voluntary departure, which people are asking me, should I just take that? Or should I, the thing is if a person fights their case in detention and they lose, you can do an appeal, but you're supposed to stay detained during that. So that's the reason why a lot of people are, it's very demoralizing and they're wanting to give up, unfortunately. So if you do, if you just Google ICE detainee locator, you'll find it. And then it'll be able to see where you put the A number, the date of birth and the country. That's probably your best bet than calling local ICE office because you could try to do that too. But it's important to have their date of birth, their name and country of origin. Again, I can't say it enough, have an immigration attorney available beforehand. There's so many of us there's only so many immigration attorneys who do detained work. So just because an immigration attorney is an immigration attorney doesn't mean that they do immigration court or asylum or detained. They might do court, but they might not do detained work. And so it's like, that's a small group. I honestly, if you were to ask me, list off a whole bunch of attorneys that do detained work in Houston, I would probably have to think about that for a minute. I could maybe think of maybe 10 or 15, but for the most part, imagine everyone's getting detained out at the same time. And they're trying to get on their calendar. Those attorneys are running around helping those clients. So it's also a scarcity situation too, because you don't want to be at the mercy of just whoever answers the phone. Like you want someone you have a good relationship, you know, who has a good reputation that you can trust and who has similar cases. Now, I also want to mention something, unfortunately, that there has been a lot of different scams out there. Because so much stuff can be done remotely. I've heard of short reports where people are pretending to be attorneys, who are like pretending to be another attorney and like pretending to be that person. I've heard of reports of that. I know some specifically, but they're also pretending, saying they're an attorney, but they're not an attorney. And maybe they're attorney in another country and they're preying on the lack of knowledge of the system for a person. And so there might be like these, we call them notarios, but basically in Latin America and in Spain, some places, a notary is higher than an attorney. And so when they hear that word, they're thinking, oh, well, they must really know what they're doing. But in the United States, like you can become a notary for like $70 a year. And so it causes confusion. People, they're thinking, oh, a notary is like, must be way cheaper than an attorney. But then what happens is then the notary makes a mistake or has problems, and then the attorney has to try to fix it. But that was a little bit easier back in the day, but now we don't have a lot of time. There's not much of a margin of error to be had about fixing things. There's not a lot of leniency. There's not a lot of oversight. There's no ombudsman anymore. And so it's really high table stakes if you file something that gets you to immigration court and gets you into trouble. So really, the other thing I will mention is that immigration's federal. So what that means is like, if I'm licensed in Texas, I practice in Texas, but I also have clients all over the country. So what can also be a little problematic is that you could have an immigration attorney, but you don't really know where they're licensed. So they usually mention it somewhere on their website or on their business card. You want to double check that. You want to also check with their state bar, their standing with the bar, and make sure that things are on the up and up. But when people, because of that, I have seen that causes some confusion to find out where they're actually licensed and who has oversight of their license. Okay, so safety plan, we talked about that. Have somebody you can trust in case of detention. So if their status insecure, and maybe the whole family is, unfortunately, then I think they should have there should have a friend or contact that they can communicate and say, this is where my stuff is, this is what I need you to do. Honestly, this is getting really complicated because people are getting deported who have houses, cars, bank accounts, things like that. Like even the story with the mom, you know what was really problematic? I mean, the whole thing is super sad and really threw me off. But one of her kids didn't have a birth certificate. And the dad of the kid was getting deported for the crime he committed. So I don't know how they're going to get the kid's birth certificate because both of the parents are deported. But these are the types of things that don't need to be in a crisis mode. Get the kids' birth certificates, probably get all their passports they are eligible for, depending on the pros and cons of what that means. And so that depends on the situation, but like, don't create unnecessary chaos on top of chaos. So having a plan, I mean, it's almost like, there's estate planning on purpose, like to make life not miserable when someone passes away. My dad passed away this year. I went through that, but we were preparing. We knew he had cancer. We knew he had health issues. We were more or less prepared, even though there's a lot of things you don't know until towards the end. But that's the type of way I'm looking at this, is it's estate planning. And it really is, because when people are getting deported, they have houses, they have power of attorney, documents, bank accounts. If you only have one person of the couple on the bank account, then that causes a problem for like, let's say in my situation, stories I've been sharing about the wife usually. Or maybe they're not legally married. We do have common law marriage here in Texas, not every state, but if you don't have a document to show that, the registration of the informal marriage, that can be problematic. So depending on your status and what you're up to, I generally say you should try to get legally married if you call the world that you're legally married, but you don't have a piece of paper to show that, because then that can probably give you more opportunities later. There are also consequences, tax, immigration, etc. But what I will say is, like in immigration, for the most part, it can be beneficial, but look at your specific case. Memorize key phone numbers. have a power of attorney for financial legal matters and plan a plan for the children. One of the things I had to do for the that client whose children were she left them here was that was getting some power of attorney document signed so that her relative could take care of the children temporarily as they figured out what they were going to do. I actually became a notary because for the specific reason, so because I can easily get into a detention facility and to be able to help individuals get those types of documents signed for their families, but really don't make it wait till your person's detained to take care of these things, because fear is paralysis. It keeps people from thinking it out, what they really want to do. If you think about these things in advance, then you have that chance to sort of breathe and make a better decision. And you need to evaluate on a regular basis. So trying to stay a little positive, but in reality, I more or less talked about how a lot of these things are not really eligible anymore. Asylum has more or less been gutted in the last 10 months. And I would say, though, depending on your situation, you might still be eligible to apply. It might buy you some time and the laws could change. But I think for the current situation, administration, they will only get worse. So it really just depends on what happens after this administration. But if you can hold out your case, you might benefit from that. I've got one court case that has been in since 2012. So, some people have been in court for a long time. The U visa is a victim of a crime. It's pretty bad to be eligible for it, unfortunately, but it does not keep you from being deported while it's pending. And currently, there's so many people who've applied and so few visas, only 10,000 a year, that it's actually taking 20 years. But if you are eligible, it could get you work authorization. And if you're not detected while you're waiting for it under this administration, you might be able to hold out and eventually be able to get a green card eventually. Victims of trafficking is another unfortunate visa to be eligible for, but it is something taking about 2 years. And it's pretty lenient, as well as the U visa for waivers and things like that. Family sponsoring, one question we had earlier today was about there's a lot of Ukrainians who came on the U4U, and also individuals who came under that Chivney, the Cuban, Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, Haitian parole. What we have seen at USCIS, so normally if a person was admitted, inspected, or paroled, and their visa is available and they applied for their adjustment of status green card, while the visa was available and they were in status, usually are eligible for the legal permanent residency or the green card. We filed that for at least a couple of U4U clients from Ukraine, and who married a US citizen. We also filed that for a child of a green card holder who came on that other parole program. Both of the times we went to the interview with USCIS here in Houston, USCIS said, we cannot adjudicate this. We are waiting for guidance about a memo to see what will come. Now, the clients obviously were distraught. We did not know when we filed everything that was going to happen, because that was a later change. But they are still here in the country. They are still able to get that work authorization. Their case is pending. Now, if they later come back and say you're not eligible, then we'll have to work on probably consular processing, which will be a really difficult thing, because most of the countries that are eligible for those programs, we either don't have diplomatic ties with or have to go to other countries. Now, a lot of people don't have access to passports, and this is all very complicated, especially for my Venezuelans as well. So anyway, I will just say, if it's not already apparent that things are changing so rapidly, that you also want to find an immigration attorney to support you that is paying attention to all of the changes, that has a decent enough team, or maybe even they're small, that they are paying attention and they're staying up to date with it, because things like this change. Like, I literally am on a call every Monday night with local attorneys about what's going on. And I'm literally on, I don't know, 2 or 3 continuing legal educations almost weekly. And my team is as well, on all the different changes and the updates that are happening, because there's just so much. And it's like puzzle pieces, or it's like a board game, like when they constantly, if you change the game rules every 5 or 10 minutes, you almost start forgetting what your original objective and how your strategy to get from A to B. So we talked about DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. At this moment, you can't apply for it new. You can still renew it, but we're also waiting to see what's going to happen for the Texan DACA recipients. And then cancellation of removal is one thing that's out there. You have to be in immigration court to apply for it. And it used to be a really great thing, but because a person who entered illegally is not eligible for bond at this very moment, and we are recording, I probably should say that, on November 15th at 10:45 a.m. I'm saying this because things can change. What usually was good, because if an individual had been here 10 years or more before they were put in immigration court or committed a crime that would stop the clock, they had an extreme unusual hardship that would affect an American or U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, U.S. citizen spouse, parent, or child, and they had good moral character, so that's 3 prongs I just listed, then they would be eligible for cancellation of removal in court. Now, if you would eventually, but if a person's detained right now and that's what they're only eligible for, they have to stay detained until they show that whole case. And like I told you the story about the wife who took a week to get the documents, she came in with a suitcase, took a while to scan and put it all together. But like, they are not letting cases take too long in detention. Like they want to move them along in 60 days. So imagine, I forgot to mention that earlier, but imagine a person gets detained and they've never talked to an immigration attorney. They have no idea what matters and what doesn't matter, where the documents are. They're detained. Someone has to go find them. If you were detained right now, would you be able to tell somebody where your taxes are, your birth certificate, your whatever? Like you could maybe say it, but would you within like a couple of clicks of buttons? That's the thing we're starting to see is a huge problem, or we've seen. But anyway, they would not be eligible for a bond if they were detained. If they're outside, they could continue. But there's one other downside to this. Again, there's not a lot of visas. And I have one client who's been asking me lots of questions. We won her case about 3.5 years ago, and she still hasn't gotten the visa because there's only so many available every year. So there's a lot of room for reform in the future whenever we can have that, but we are probably just going to keep going downhill with options and less legal options for people. So for children, we care about the children as much as we care about everybody else, but let's take care of the ones who can't take care of themselves. Establish legal guardianship in case of detention. Really think about that. Sometimes people want to put it with someone who doesn't have a status, but you should probably also have one with somebody who does have a status, because what if that person, this is very common, that you have a close relationship with, is not in status, and so it's more of the same problem. Make sure the child has a valid ID and important documents, like we were talking about the birth certificate. Like let's say you get deported, your kid's a more American born. Not only do they need that birth certificate, but they either need their American birth certificate or some other passport. I'm sorry, whatever. They need a passport if they're going to come visit you and come or relocate. Let me give you an example about an American passport. You have to have both parents, if there are 2 parents, sign off. And so, especially on that first one, and if both of them can't go to apply, you have to have an notarized statement saying that you're not going. I had a case recently where my client gave birth, her husband here, and the husband was somewhere else. She had to go get him to notarize something in a foreign country. I mean, and to get the baby, the birth certificate, passport. It was a crazy mess. But this is the things that are happening, and hers was doable. But like in the other story, with the client, the kid doesn't even have a birth certificate. So those can be challenging. And even with the Mexican passport, I'm familiar with that process. They even have the images of the parents on the passport, actually, the facial images to confirm that like who's who, so that whoever's looking at the passport knows who the parents are. Teach children their rights and what their options are. I think so many people are not telling kids what's going on. They might not even tell the kid they don't have status. This is a huge, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but let me tell you from an immigration perspective. If you don't tell somebody what their status is until it's almost too late, they might have made a false claim to citizenship. This is what happened to a lot of DACA kids back in 2012 when it came out. a lot of kids were coming to me and they were saying, I just found out I'm not a US citizen. And so up until that point, they were saying on their documents they were citizen. That was a false claim to citizenship, but they didn't qualify for an exception and they didn't know. And that actually was worse than the parents not telling them. So anyway, that's a whole nother story about what people should say. But I think if they're age appropriate, they should know enough to be helpful. And I've also found, unfortunately, children usually are the ones who speak English and are more cultural adopted to America. They're a lot of times taking on adult roles in this process and sort of is it parentization or something like that? They are taking on parental roles and responsibility, which is quite unfortunate. But I do think it is important for them to know what is age appropriate. But this is a big problem, and I think we just haven't barely seen the impact of it. When this isn't just about detention lasting too long, this is also about people being not eligible for detention. So our firm, Powers Law Group, we do habeas cases, which is in federal court. So I'm admitted into all the district courts in Texas. We're in Southern District right here. In the Houston area, but even if you're in another detained somewhere else, I mean, Texas has most of the detention facilities, but if you're detained like in Louisiana, you need to get a Louisiana licensed admitted attorney because they're more specific over there. But you can normally work with other attorneys with what's called pro hoc vice. Anyway, long story short, this is an opportunity to get people out. At the moment, it does take a little bit more work. It is a federal lawsuit, but it is possible, and so we are letting people know that this exists. But you have to be organized. You have to have pretty much a decent case, and you have to have the funds to do this. And so this is possible. I just would, and the individual could get out, forcing the immigration judge to give bond. So there are different programs out there. I really think that it's sort of hard to say who's doing what at this moment. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has about 17,000 attorneys around the country, and we are working together to keep up to date and help as many people as we can during all of this. And we have liaison groups and we're sharing information. They do have a directory of members. Rice is here in the Texas area originally. There's also something called the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative, HILSC. And if you look them up, I think it might be houstonimmigration.org is their website. They have a hotline, but they also have some of the resources of other collaborating nonprofits that touch immigration, work in immigration in some capacity. And so they do have sort of like a divide and conquer of like helping the different communities. The different consulates, including I work a lot with the Mexican consulate in town, are trying to be very understanding and helpful. In Mexican consulate, for example, has seen an extreme uptick in people applying for dual citizenship. They were eligible for American and Mexican, for example, and so they used to have only like I don't know a handful of people, and now they like have thousands of people applying for that, and there's different groups out there, but I don't know, there was so much cut in funding. I don't know who's doing what at the moment. But you can always try to do some research to figure that out. So we're trying to get information out, but very likely this needs to be seen like online because people are afraid to come out in person. And also this is, it would be great to be put in multiple languages, even subtitles, so that people know what those options are. And this is also very timely. Things change, like I mentioned before. There's different groups like United We Dream and the ACLU who are doing a lot of work. And there's also like mass litigation to try to have change. So between these nonprofit groups, these advocacy groups, the media, and different immigration attorneys, and then maybe churches and other groups out there, we're all trying to just stay the course as much as possible. There's a lot going on. So this is the most recent thing that happened. This was on October 31st, this case, the CIGMLVSG. And it basically said that if someone were to be detained and they are from a country The US has a agreement with a third safe country or the ACA agreement, then they would send them to that country. And so if you can imagine everything I've been saying, pretty much they got rid of judges with favorable rulings. They've pre-terminated court cases. They've gutted asylum law. They've made people not eligible for bond. They keep coming out with these BIA decisions that make it infinitely harder and harder to win anything. And I didn't even mention there's something called circumventing lawful pathways, which makes people who entered through another country and didn't use the CBP-1 app ineligible for asylum, which means they're only eligible for withholding, which means they can get deported to South Sudan, et cetera. More or less, it's just been this deportation machine. And ICE, which is what we were talking about originally. So this is in full force. I don't see it stopping, but advocates and groups and people who care about due process have been trying to slow it down, even if it's just incrementally, with using lawsuits, education, information sharing, sharing the stories with the media, which I do as much as I possibly can. And so this is, I don't know if there was a horrible case dropped on Friday night, but I don't think I saw it. But anyway, this was from like 2 weeks ago. I think this was on Halloween. So the final takeaways, I mean, there's what the law is, and then there's what's happening, and they're not exactly the same right now. I should not be able to enter your home without a judicial warrant, but it's been happening. They're picking up people anywhere for the most part. You have the right to remain silent, but I really think you should have a plan in place before. You should not instigate an issue, and you should try to avoid places that could be a hotbed for a problem. Have legal help, that you have a competent, competent experienced relationship. If maybe you've had a consult only, but you didn't hire them for anything. But for my firm, for example, we still keep those documents, and we still, if they ever come back, we have something to start with, which can be helpful if a person becomes detained. Know your options and what your forms of relief. I will say that this changes, right? I've said that too many times, but the point is, back in the day, maybe you were told you weren't eligible for something, and then maybe you were, but then now you probably aren't for the most part because legal options have been reduced. But maybe on the other side of this administration, there'll be changes. So I think for the most part, those who can try to hang tight without getting deported for the next few years, I believe the pendulum is going to swing to being more favorable because we're going to see the impact on our community, our economy, our American children, and families, especially here in Texas, where we have such interconnected, interwoven families that I think the pendulum will swing toward being more pro-immigrant and more legal options. But be careful, have a safety plan in place, just like we have hurricane plans, like we have estate planning, have like a deportation plan, and then also avoid scams. Just like you have to be careful of phishing and cybersecurity issues. The same thing, unfortunately. Do research on the attorney. Look them up multiple ways. Maybe someone says, "Oh, this is a good one." Okay, well, that's great. But then also do your research. Look online. Do some Google, maybe ChatGPT. Look around and make sure that lines up with what you're hearing, and look at the reviews and check the state bar as well. And then stay connected with community resources of what's going on out there, just like today's presentation. There's a lot going on. Find maybe some reliable podcast or newsletter or thought leader that you can follow. A few people. Unfortunately, sometimes in the media, there's a lot of sensationalism, unfortunately. So I would say have a few resources that you want to listen to. We put videos on our TikTok, our Instagram, our Facebook. We also have our newsletter in English and Spanish every week, every other week. And honestly, we work really hard to distill what's the most important thing for people to know. We are full service, and I know today was a lot more about knowing your rights and more of humanitarian. And maybe more removal asylum and that but we do employment-based investment like H-1Bs, Os, T-ins, and family-based consular processing waivers, federal litigation. We do all of those. And naturalization. We've seen an uptick in people applying for citizenship because they don't want to be concerned about that. I've even had people who are naturalized citizens come into my pay for consult and are concerned about their future because they're afraid that they might be denaturalized. So these are definitely some scary times right now. But I think we just have to stay hopeful, stay educated, and stay strong, honestly. So this is my information. The office is in the Heights, but we are available to do Skype, I'm sorry, Skype, Zoom, in-person, phone consultations. Everyone in my team speaks Spanish. We also have Portuguese and some French and Turkish speaking team members, and we just want to be a resource for the community during this time. So I'll go ahead and open up for any specific questions, and hopefully this was a really good resource for you.